Hey all, today I'm going to be giving you some property viewing tips for buy-to-let investors and first-time buyers. These tips will help you decide whether the property you're viewing is going to be a good investment or a good buy. I'll also be giving you some questions that you could ask estate agents as well to help you analyse the property and really figure out just if it's what you need and what you're looking for. A property viewing is the perfect opportunity to really look at and scrutinise a property to figure out whether it has good potential or if it's just going to be too expensive and it's going to be too much work and take too much time. It will help you determine whether the area that the property is in is nice, whether the property is a good size, whether it has a decent layout, and a whole bunch of other key information. But obviously the only downside to property viewings is that they're fairly short and you might not remember everything that you see. But before we get started, be sure to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now let's get into the video. The first tip I have for you is to bring with you a list of questions, whether you write them down in a notepad, on a pad of paper, or just in the notes section of your phone, because I can pretty much guarantee that you'll forget at least some of the questions that you want to ask and some of the things that you want to look at while you're there, and I know for a fact that I definitely do. Another tip I have is to arrive at the viewing about 15 minutes before it's booked for. That way you can have a walk around the property and see what it's like from the outside. You can see what the immediate neighbours are like, see whether there's any noisy restaurants or shops and bits and pieces like that. Is the local train station too close and too noisy? Is the road that the property is built on a busy main road that makes loads of noise? Are there big electricity pylons nearby or power lines overhead? These things can really impact the price of a property. These are all things that you can list down on your property viewing checklist. Just list them all down one by one and go through and answer them yes or no. Is the area nice? Yes or no? Tick. Is there a busy road or a noisy train? Yes or no? Tick. Does the property look nice from the outside? Are there any foundation cracks or brick cracks? Is the roof sagging? Yes or no? Tick. These are all points that I would definitely have on my property viewing checklist, and you could even break your checklist down to like an outside checklist and an inside checklist as well. Moving inside the house, one of the first things that I'll be looking for is the fuse box or the switch breaker, whatever you want to call it. You should be able to find some details on there of when it was installed and when it was last tested, so you should be able to gauge whether it's a new system or an old system. It's probably better to find a property with a newer fuse board, because that way you know that you won't have to replace the fuse board, you probably won't have to replace the wiring, and it's probably going to be safe and not cause any harm or damage to anyone either. This is also true for investors that want to renovate and sell a property as well, because your typical first-time buyer probably isn't too interested in the fuse board, so it could save you some money on refurbishment costs, and obviously you're not cutting corners because you've bought a property that has a newer fuse box in it anyway. Some investors like to buy properties with old fuse boards and old wiring because they can add value to the property by doing a rewire, and that's absolutely fine. But from my perspective, the things that tend to add the most value to a property and increase the value of a house the most are the visual things like the bathroom and the kitchen. Or maybe you could add an extension to the property and make it even bigger. Either way, these things are all very visual as opposed to a rewire, which is obviously hidden behind the walls that the tenant or the owner would never see. If you're enjoying the video so far, then be sure to leave a comment down below letting me know your top tips for property viewing. If you've never bought a property before, or you've never even been to view a property before, then comment down below letting me know which tip you think is best. Next up, you probably want to try and find out what heating system and what water system the property has. Maybe it's a boiler downstairs with a single immersion cylinder. Maybe it's a dual immersion cylinder. Maybe the storage tank is up in the loft, or maybe it's downstairs. Maybe you'll need a shower pump, or maybe there'll be a gravity system which will be enough for the shower. Maybe it's an economy 7 heater, maybe it's not. There's loads of things to consider when you look at the water system and the heating system, so it's definitely best to get them noted down for later so you can kind of plan your attack on how best you can renovate that property. I would also really advise to take a whole load of photos while you're walking around and viewing the property, or even a video, because I find it quite hard to mentally tally and mentally total how much the refurbishment is going to cost or how much the broken things are going to cost to replace. I find it quite hard to do that while I'm going around, so I find it much easier to take some photos of the kitchen, the bathroom, any mould that I see, anything that's broken and needs to be fixed and replaced, because that way I can just total it up later. One of the hardest things I find with a property viewing is that you might only be limited to 10 minutes or half an hour. So it's quite difficult to obviously do this entire budgeting process of a full 3 to 6 month refurb in 20 minutes. So it's way better to take loads of notes and loads of photos, because then you can spend as much time as you like going through all the data that you've collected to figure out how much it's going to cost. Obviously you can always book a second viewing, a third viewing, fourth, fifth, however many you like. And I would definitely advise this, especially if you place an offer on the property and it gets accepted. You could then come back a few weeks later and start measuring up the kitchen and the bathroom for the new appliances that you're going to put in. Maybe the whole kitchen needs replacing, or maybe it's only the worktop that needs replacing because all the cupboards are fine. Or maybe you want to change the faceplates of the cupboards, but the carcasses themselves of the cupboards are okay. It's way better obviously if you've just gone around and taken a few photos or made some notes, because at least that way you'll remember what exactly you want to change on the property. Now so far you've seen that a lot of these tips that I've given you are actually tips that you can implement yourself without asking the estate agent. You obviously don't really need the estate agent's help to walk around the property and make notes of things that you can see. But what kind of questions would you need to ask the estate agent? And this can vary quite a lot depending on whether you're looking at a house or a flat, and you can have mixed results and it could be a bit hit and miss. Usually when a property is listed for sale, it's assigned to an estate agent who obviously manages the sale and learns about the property. And that might be quite a senior estate agent. And then when you book in a property viewing, there might be a more junior estate agent that accompanies you on that viewing that might not know too much about the property you're looking at. I've definitely had it before when the estate agent that was accompanying me on a viewing had no idea about the property. They had no idea when it was built. They didn't even know what asbestos or service charge was. So they weren't really that much help. And they kind of just told me to ask the other estate agent that was managing the sale the questions instead. The first question I would probably ask, and deduce if you haven't been able to from the advert, is what the square footage or square meterage of the property is and how it's measured. Is it just the property area, or does it include the garden as well? Is it the internal area or the external area as well, including the walls? Square footage or square meterage is really important, because you can pretty much guarantee that a 1,000 square foot property here is going to be worth more than a 300 square foot property right next door. Now it obviously doesn't make too much difference if you're comparing a 1,000 square foot property to a 1,030 square foot property. But obviously if there's a property that's 800 square foot and the estate agents have included a 200 square foot garden on top of it to make it look like it's 1,000 square foot, it could make quite a bit of difference. It's also worth asking if the properties are flat, how long is left on the lease, what the service charge is and what the ground rent is, because these can all really impact the value of a property. A short lease is very undesirable to a first-time buyer, and even to some investors as well, because it's very expensive to extend. But maybe you do want to buy a property with a short lease. You should probably ascertain whether it's actually possible to extend it easily as part of the purchase process. If the previous owner has owned the property for 2 years or more, they can apply to quite easily extend the lease. But obviously if they haven't, it's a much more difficult process. Short leases could cost upwards of £20,000 to extend, so obviously that could massively impact the purchase price or the sale price of the property that you're viewing. So you definitely want to know how long is left on that lease and whether you need to adjust your calculations for that. Ground rents can also be really concerning as well sometimes, although I think recent leasehold reform has pretty much removed all of the 10-year doubler leases that were still in existence. These were basically properties where the ground rent on the lease doubled every 10 years. Now you might look at it and think, that's not too bad. If it's £100 a year for the ground rent and it doubles in 10 years time, that's not that much money. But obviously looking at it from the bigger picture, if the lease has a 150-year term, then after the first 50 years, the ground rent will already be £3,000 a year. And after the first 100 years, the ground rent will be over £100,000 a year just for the ground rent. So that obviously massively impacts the price of a property, and these properties were pretty much unsellable when people realised just how bad these 10-year doubler leases really were. Service charge is also a pretty important one to ask about as well. Usually service charges around about £1,000 a year, but you'd have a pretty nasty surprise if you found out it was like £3,000 or £5,000 a year. If you've made it this far into the video, then be sure to comment down below saying 10-year doubler so that I know that you've made it this far into the video. Be sure to also check out some of my other videos if you haven't already as well. It also might be worth asking the estate agent how long the property's been on the market for. It might also be worth asking what the seller's situation is as well. If they're a couple that are just selling their first home, they're probably unlikely to take a big discount. But obviously if it's a probate sale where someone's unfortunately passed away and has left their home to the next of kin, maybe it's their son, and the son already has a second home, or maybe the son has 2 homes already and this is his 3rd home, then he probably won't mind selling it for a bit of a discount if it's a quick sale. Also, if it's a property that's been repossessed and is being sold by the bank, it will probably sell for a bit of a discount as well. But it's worth remembering that when you make an offer on a repossessed property, even if that offer is accepted, it doesn't get taken off the market. So you could be going through the legal process, have paid the deposit for your solicitors, be arranging your mortgage, and then someone else comes along and offers a higher price. The bank will then abandon your sale and take the higher price, and you'll be left with some solicitors' fees, which might not be ideal. It might also be worth asking the estate agent what rental prices are like in the area as well. If you're an investor and you're buying the property as a buy-to-let property, but you haven't quite figured out yet how much you can get for it with the rent, then it might be worth asking the estate agent, because they'll have a pretty good idea of what the property will rent for, because obviously estate agents rent properties as well. But it is worth remembering that the estate agent does act for the seller. So the estate agent probably isn't going to tell you that the seller will accept exactly a 16% discount. They'll probably say that they won't accept any discount at all and that they'll only accept it if you offer above the asking price. And they probably also won't tell you that actually properties in this area don't really rent and it's not that desirable. They'll tell you it's guaranteed to rent, so that obviously they can make the sale. And that's pretty much my top tips for a property viewing and what questions to ask the estate agent. It can be quite tricky to do a property viewing because you don't really get much time, so just make sure that you take loads of photos and loads of notes and you can refer back to them later. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to check out some of my others. Alternatively, subscribe to the channel and ding the notification bell, because that way you'll be alerted when I upload a new video. Cheers!